Out of the blue, in his 28th year, Zach began to develop panic attacks. At the most inconvenient moments, at an office presentation or a business networking event, he'd feel extraordinarily anxious, get an urge to run away, and often need to find a bathroom very fast. It started to become hugely debilitating for Zach, who worked in a rather unforgiving, fast-moving tech company in San Francisco. A friend recommended a therapist. It was pretty weird to find himself on a therapist's couch. He'd never had much time for the idea of therapy. The first thing the therapist told him was that here, in this room, he could panic just about as much as he liked, and it wasn't going to be a problem. He could run away, faint, be sick, and it was all fine by her. That helped immensely. They began talking about what some of these panic attacks might have in common. It was actually deeply refreshing to talk to someone who didn't keep interrupting or shifting the agenda. Someone who just kept the focus on what he was feeling and tried to decode it for him. Something struck Zach as he spoke. The panic he felt had a habit of arising whenever there were expectations on him, whenever people were waiting for him to be impressive, clever, or decisive in some way, and there was a chance to make himself look like a fool or a jerk. It was as though one part of him was deliberately undermining and sabotaging the other, whenever there was an opportunity to shine or triumph. "If it carries on like this, I'll have no option but to head back home and live with my parents," remarked Zach darkly one day towards the end of a session. That turned out to be the start of a very fruitful line of discussion. Zach had grown up in rural Minnesota. His father was a roofer. Neither of his parents had been to college. He'd been the bright one who'd flown the nest. The gap between Zach and his parents was now huge. He might earn in 1 year what his father earned in 5. The more Zach told the therapist about his background, the more he realized what a burden of guilt he was carrying around with him. The guilt that success was leading him to exceed his parents in a way that was at once exciting and properly frightening. Zach wanted success, but being successful was also threatening to separate him from the two people he felt the greatest debt to. The panic attacks seemed like a devilish way to stay faithful to his parents. It was like an act of self-sabotage, calculated to protect the parents, and especially the father, who had some competitive, envious sides to his otherwise warm nature. All this from the risks of humiliation. It was as though, in one part of his mind, Zach didn't believe he could be both an impressive adult and a loyal son. Discovering this about himself helped Zach a lot. Gradually, the symptoms lessened. He learned how to understand himself for wanting not to have the life his parents had had, and to forgive himself for looking for something better. At the same time, he accepted that he could remain loving and admiring of many qualities his parents had, and that those around him in the tech scene often didn't. Zach continued in therapy for a year. The attacks stopped completely, without any need for medication. It was as if part of his mind had been listened to and no longer felt the need to ruin Zach's life in order to be heard. Recently, Zach was invited to address a conference of 2,000 delegates. The speech went perfectly.